I'd say that we always try and leverage the most the most recent tools. We like to try and stay ahead of the curve in many aspects. Um, I think one aspect of the global visual effects pipeline that's changing is a move more towards open source toolkits. So where possible, we sort of recognise that it's very important to try and work with the community, because there are a number of benefits. You know, if everyone is working in the same way and moving forward in a similar direction, it means that you get people who already know how to work in a particular way. You've got tools that are sort of more global than having to hire people in to use some very specific custom piece of kit. You know, if you're using more off the shelf tools or working practices, then it's easier to kind of pull people in and plug them in and let them do what they want to do best. The other way to handle it is to kind of make it so that your pipeline supports as many tools as possible. So if you've got one artist who comes in who say wants to do their modeling in ZBrush, you've got someone else who comes in who wants to use Mudbox. You make it so that they can use whichever tool is most appropriate for a task, and you know that it'll come out in a compatible way with the rest of your pipeline. So it'll end up plugging into your renderer without any implications, or you can pass it over to a lighter who'll be able to view it in Maya, and there'll be no unexpected headaches from doing that. It can be a very, very difficult thing to find the right balance. If you're able to kind of give an overall direction to this is where we want our tool set to go, that can certainly help to shape the tools that you will create on a per show basis. So it can be that someone will kind of have an idea that, oh, hey, if we make this tool, then this will deliver this show. But if someone else is able to take sort of a longer view on things and maybe sort of say, well, if we write it in this way, then we can probably get a little bit more use out of it and kind of use it for more future shows, so that you end up having to do less per project development. So it's something where, coming somewhere like SIGGRAPH, you're able to sort of get a feel for what's out there and what's available, and talk to different vendors, find out what their plans are, and find out if, there's no point in us investing a lot of time on working on something which will take us a year to develop if all we need to do is wait a further 6 months and then it's going to be in one of the major packages. So we try and stay abreast of everything that's, coming over the horizon, and where we sort of identify something that won't be ready in time, then maybe we can think about developing something ourselves that will not end up getting thrown away, but will be as flexible as possible for the future. One of the strangest shifts in having a lot more stereo shows to do is that we're no longer the guys at the end of the queue. We've got someone else who's kind of waiting for our stuff that we need to think a lot more about actually delivering all of our stuff exactly on time. There's less room to kind of push deliveries, and you need to make sure that you're not going to mess those guys up by delivering things too late. So it kind of means you're a little bit more aware of these are the things that we have to have locked a little bit earlier on. So say just getting animation sign off and knowing that if animation changes, that could have major impacts on stereo. So it means being more aware of doing as much previs as possible, doing as much planning as possible, and also just building shots with stereo in mind. So some of the old cheats that you would have happily relied on, you can't really do so much, so you have to kind of think about some of the new cheats instead. Yeah, I think having more 3D options in Nuke in particular has really helped with being able to think about stereo and being able to kind of do a lot of the stereo fixes in comp. So even if it's something as simple as taking a specular highlight and replicating it for the second eye, that's something that previously probably would have had to be done as a reprojection in 3D, which would have meant going back into the render pipeline. So being able to do a lot of that stuff in the 2D world means that there's a much faster turnaround. So it puts a little bit more of a burden on the 2D artists, and it means that they have to get a little bit more involved in some of that kind of 3D work that previously they wouldn't have been so involved in. So getting them to think more about that sort of work and expanding the sort of Nuke 3D tool set so that it's able to do some more of that stereo work has been a little bit of a challenge, but that's kind of really helped to make all of our stereo work go through okay. I think everyone's kind of just getting to grips with stereo and what's the most efficient way to do it. There was a misperception that the best way to do stereo is always to shoot it, in proper stereo. And certainly from hearing from some other productions, from some other companies, sometimes that's not always the best way to do things. Sometimes it's best to take more of a hybrid approach and look at it on a per shot basis. So the more education that happens and the more filmmakers get experience of stereo issues, the more I think people will kind of know what the different approaches, what the best way to kind of compose your shots and plan your shots are. So I think there's a new film language emerging really, where compositionally everything changes. Previously you would have framed it in a certain way that would have worked on the 2D flattened image, but now you've really got to think about how to compose things in 3D. So it's everything from shot design on set through to doing more previs to kind of plan these things out, so you can get a little bit more of an idea how that might impact on the work down the line. Just means across the board everyone's having to think about these things and really not treat it as something that you just tack on right at the end. It's something that needs to be integrated into your shot design all the way from the beginning all the way through to the end. Yes, we're definitely having to do more and more previs. Our previs department is expanding very rapidly, and we also get our previs guys also happen to look after our stereo as well. So they're the guys who know the most about cameras and cinematography. So those guys look after both shot design at the very early stage and see it through to making stereo camera creation on shots that become stereo later on. So there's a big effort for us to kind of make it so that, rather than previs being like a rough, sloppy, throw things together kind of thing, make it so that it's more like they're using assets that could actually end up in real shots. So they might be using previs assets. So it's an asset that's built that's light enough to kind of pull around and have a lot of flexibility so that they can work in real time. But then when that gets passed on, then when you sort of send that scene file on to the person who's going to do the real shot layout, they're able to just swap out those assets to use something that's high res that'll actually hold up in a final shot. So thinking about things in those sort of terms means that you're able to kind of design the shots in quite a useful way, and it minimizes the kind of reworking the shots later on, once things come in when you start doing it for real. I'd say one of the most important things with previs, where we're trying to push it anyway, is to try and get as much realism as possible into what you're presenting as your previs. So the better your previs looks, we find the more likely it is to get a proper sign-off. If you're presenting just a set of grey boxes and some really rough animation, it can be quite hard for a director to actually sign off on it. So they might be seeing it and they might think, yeah, okay, that's probably conveying what I want the shot to convey. But then once you actually dress it in properly and once it starts to increase in realism, then they might sort of then have to adjust things and say, you know what, that's not really what I thought it was. I'm going to have to make some adjustments. So trying to get it look as good as possible, as early as possible, we find really helps to actually make sure that what they're seeing, what they're signing off on, is actually the shot that you'll end up producing.